Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be taking a second look at the Final Fantasy 16 website. Now, not that we necessarily missed anything the first time around, but one single word of new information has made me kind of want to just take a second look at everything we analyzed in the first video, breaking down the world and characters. Now, the one thing that has actually changed has nothing to do with the website. I was told there was a change to the website, and it turns out there was not. However, another source of information, the Final Fantasy 16 Twitter, put out a description of Clive that clashes with the description that is actually available on the site. So as a reminder, let's quickly go to Clive's description here on the main page. And as you can see, nothing's really changed here. Most importantly, the last line, alas, Clive's promising career is to end in tragedy at the hands of the mysterious dark Eikon Ifrit, sending him on a dangerous road to revenge. There's nothing wrong with that. In the last video, we analyzed what the term dark Eikon might mean. If it was simply a means of describing that it was evil by some measure, were there more dark icons out there? And that's still a question that I think is perfectly valid, and we're not going to be revisiting that in this video. However, the Final Fantasy XVI Twitter page posted out their own description of Clive, which is pretty much the entirety of what you read here, minus one particular word. Now, if we go over here, we can see that their description is not only shorter, it just takes kind of the end half, but it says for the same line we just read, alas, Clive's promising career is to end in tragedy at the hands of the mysterious ninth Eikon Ifrit, setting him on a dark and dangerous road to revenge. Now, I'm willing to bet that this is actually from an early draft of what was probably going to go on the website, but it was what was tweeted out by the official Final Fantasy XVI Twitter. It's also possible that it is an updated one. However, you'd assume something like that would maybe be left until we, have maybe seen 8 other than Ifrit in the first place. So that immediately raises some flags, because it actually falls in line with something I started talking about in the last video, and something I want to explore a little bit more in depth in this one. Now, for Ifrit to be the ninth, there obviously has to be 8 that already exist. Now, if we actually go to the map and take a direct look at it, this is without any sort of website thrills over the top, what we can currently see on the map for Final Fantasy XVI. Now, fortunately, that gives us a better view. In the last video, I showed some confusion over Dragon's Breath being mentioned for 2 different nations, although I did acknowledge that the kingdom is probably, the Iron Kingdom themselves specifically, is probably these islands out to the west, and that they probably are contentious over this mother crystal, the one that Rosaria uses for their dominant that summons Phoenix. Now, weird given that the Iron Kingdom themselves doesn't really care about having a dominant, and in fact executes them if they are ever to be born there. It raises the question, does that mean that Phoenix is sometimes born over in the Western Islands and is executed and then reborn in Rosaria? Or is it just maybe there's not only one dominant that needs to be born to any given mother crystal, and maybe there's not only one icon for each given mother crystal? And that's kind of the idea that I want to explore today. Now, being this is the uninterrupted map, of course, the first thing I looked at was to see if all the mother crystals we can currently see are the only ones on the map. There's a big question mark about the darkened areas on the map, if they are simply lush forests, or if they are considered inhabitable lands. Obviously, all the way up to the north is probably the biggest question, where we actually see that all the way to the northwest. But let's just focus on what we have on the map currently and see if we can discern what the 8 icons before Ifrit probably are. Now, as of right now, on the west here, we have the Dragon's Breath, which is what gives Rosaria their Phoenix dominant. So that's 1. We go to the south, we have the Dalmekians. They have Titan's Mother Crystal, thus they have the second one. We know that Titan is indeed their icon, their dominant summons. Over to the east, we established that they probably summon Odin, as their flag actually has. And in case you missed the first part of the video, I don't mind going to it. Their flag pretty much has Sleipnir on it. It's a 6-legged horse. Whether or not they intend to, as you can see on the right-hand side here, combine that conceptually with Ixion is a little bit up for debate. The color scheme tends to lend itself to something that would be more lightning-based. So either Odin is lightning-based, or this Sleipnir, 6-legged Sleipnir, is a 6-legged Ixion, which has, of course, been something that people have considered. But if they're going back to basics with this, I have a feeling that we'll probably be seeing Odin. Just the question of whether or not he's lightning based. Now, looking back on the map, we can kind of get an idea. Something I couldn't really see super well the last time is that the elements of each of these mother crystals is made a little more apparent. It was already kind of apparent with the flag flags, and that was in line with some of the theories we had in the previous video. But looking over to the top right, where you can see the nation, and excuse me because I'm terrible, the Wallowids, never mind, I just remembered it. It almost appears to be a force that's falling out of the sky, which is also roughly the same color as what we see on their flag. So odds are that is actually lightning based. Some people may think water as well. It is a country that appears to be situated in the middle of a lagoon of some kind, surrounded with almost like a barrier reef of islands along the northern side. But let's just say for the time being that their icon is indeed Odin. Now we look over to the north, something that we were suspecting when it came to the actual nation to the north, excuse me, that's the empire. Okay, Sanbreque, that's the name I couldn't remember. Is that it looks much more clearly like ice, in a sense, compared to when I looked at it the first time. I suspected that the Sanbreque's flag was actually of Shiva. We know that they are a theocracy. They're largely driven by religion. They believe the Holy Empire is the physical manifestation of their icon, and that their icon pretty much only shows itself during times of war. Now, the one thing that I went looking for in this, we suspected that maybe this represented the Knights Thornton, or the Knights of the Knights of the Round is what we were going with. Sorry, I had to go with Final Fantasy 14 references there to get back to it. But I decided to focus more on the saint at the top, who almost certainly is a woman, which was another reason why it was Shiva. We also have the color of the flag, which is kind of I guess it's, I can't really tell if it's blue, so feel free to correct me as someone who's colorblind. I just kind of associate this kind of the white stripe down the middle and the darker colors on the side to be an icy kind of hue. Now I have the trailer pulled up here, and while there are some specific things I want to look into, I decided to take another look at Shiva herself. So I have the volume turned down, but we're just going to let this play until we actually get to Shiva. Mostly because to shrink everything around it and just capture it without having to mess around, as you can see, I shrunk it down to an ant's font size. You can see the little search bar at the top and whatnot. I've actually been meaning to take a peek at some of these guys' armor to see if it matches some other things. These guys as well, we know these guys are the Dhalmekians. These guys, I suspect, other than the fact that they speak English, which we know that the Iron Kingdom speaks a different language, we suspected that being assassins of dominance, that they just might actually be from the Iron Kingdom. But going a little bit forward, we see these are the Crusaders and the Dhalmekians, if the trailer is not throwing us a red herring, which is entirely possible. The big thing I wanted to take a look at when I came back to this scene, the scene at the very beginning where Titan is summoned, is I wanted to see the dynamic between Shiva and Titan. And what I noticed when I got to this freeze screen is that that crown sure does look a lot like the crown that's situated atop the head of the priestess in the Sanbreque flag. Now, I'm not saying that that demands that it probably is Shiva, but it begs the question of why the Dhalmekians and the Holy Empire might be fighting here. It also doesn't seem like they're using any sort of holy attire. We see some attire later that kind of contradicts this theory that that's actually the Empire of Sanbreque, that the Crusaders, although I guess a Crusader is a very fitting name for a holy empire, for a frontline force. So actually, now that I say it out loud, I almost kind of take back saying that it undermines it, because Crusader is a very, I guess, holy warrior style term. It would make sense that she was here. The question would be, what are they fighting over? Of course, the Blight, at the point we see it in the trailer, has probably been rampaging for quite some time. So trying to take more lands would probably be well within the reason of expectation with warring nations that were already barely teetering on peace and were always at the constant threat of war. So I'm willing to comfortably say, between the color scheme of their mother crystal, the noting of the crown on Shiva's head, as well as just the flag itself, that Shiva probably belongs to the Holy Empire of Sanbreque. So that gives us 4. That leaves 4 that are completely unattended. And yes, I know there's also, of course, Dragon's Crown, but we'll have to get back to that. It is Dragon's Crown, right? Just want to double check here to make sure. Drake's Tail. Sorry, no, it's Drake's... no, it's Drake's Tail. All right, there we go. I don't know why I thought it was that. How I got all sorts of off on that. Drake's Crown. Why did I think it was called Drake's Crown? Where is the crown? There you got Fang, we've got Breath, we've got Spine. Maybe that's why, because I saw Spine and Head. And then we have Tail. So that's 5 pieces of what I'm presuming is going on. So I think it's safe to say that one of the icons of 8 is probably Bahamut. It's worth saying that even just the way these continents are shaped almost kind of reminds me of a fragmented Bahamut. You can see some I guess, geography here that's kind of grounded in the way that our tectonics work in real life. You can see portions where the continents, you could almost push them together and they would work. You see it pretty much from, top to bottom. And to assume that maybe all of these were once one and that the tail somehow signifies that is perfectly within reason, though you'd imagine that the tail would then be further to the east. But there's all sorts of ways that that could be interpreted. So I'm willing to bet we know who the other remaining icons are. I suggested in the original that the OG6 plus Phoenix and Bahamut and Odin were probably 9 icons that were present. It was actually the original theory that I posted in the first video. Now, the OG6 is a term that Final Fantasy XI players use to refer to the original 6 terrestrial avatars. I think it was. It's been a while since I've had to refer to that. But the original 6 terrestrial avatars, which were Ifrit, Shiva, Ramu, Garuda, Leviathan, and Titan. Now, obviously, before that, generationally with Final Fantasy, that wouldn't be the OG6. We'd have to, of course, wonder, who are really the OGs, even if we've seen them in a lot of the various games. That being said, Final Fantasy XIV followed suit and used the OG6 again as pretty much their A Realm Reborn sets of primals. Of course, they mixed in Moggle, but they also had Odin and Bahamut also present in that initial set. And Phoenix as well. Pretty much all 9 of them plus Moggle pretty much make their appearances in A Realm Reborn in Final Fantasy XIV. So the fact that the same creative division is in charge of this, Yoshi P is producing it, Hiroshi Takai, who worked for many, many years on Final Fantasy XIV, is now directing this. There are just so many parallels to draw between the two that it's hard to imagine that those aren't the 9 primals, or 9 icons in this case, that we are referring to now. So where are the remaining ones? Well, Garuda is one that we actually have already identified as one that's at least somewhere in this game. In case you're wondering where we're making that bold claim, here in the trailer just before Joshua gets really, really mad, we get a couple of scenes here, and I'm trying to go back to them because this is a bit all over the place. In fact, it's right before this scene right here, which, by the way, is a scene that appears to be taking place somewhere near the Holy Empire of Sanbreque. As we can see these, this is almost like a priest enemy that's being fought. We can see them in very similar armor to that of the Dragoon that we saw earlier. Some very traditional-looking jobs, actually, coming out of the Holy Empire of Sanbreque. But here we go, right here, we get this kind of pull, and this claw attack with the feathers and the wind elements, that is almost certainly him being, given a blessing by Garuda. Now again, we have no inclination of where Garuda would be on this map. None of the existing nations and their mother crystals really resonate with it. You could maybe argue the clouds that are around the mountain, and perhaps maybe 2 icons can reside in all of these. That would explain Ifrit, but if Ifrit's the 9th, you'd have to assume they already know about Bahamut, who we are at this point still assuming takes up Drake's tail. It's also very possible that Drake's tail is actually Leviathan, given that Leviathan being a long serpent, a tail is kind of a fitting thing, but also the giant maelstrom that exists right next to it in the middle of the water, which is what I would assume is actually what caused these continents to separate thousands or millions of years ago, whatever most of the time they work in thousands, whatever the lore wants to say. So if you're comfortable saying that you think the tail is Leviathan and that its power, no dominant resides there, so we can't say anything with any certainty, that gives us Garuda and Ramu. Now, Garuda and Ramu are kind of just a mystery at this point. We can say with some certainty that Garuda is in here. It is unlikely that that giant wind claw is coming from something that isn't Garuda. We have the entirety of the islands to the north. We don't know, again, the Iron Kingdom, if a dominant were born there, if it were to be born with the power of the Phoenix, or if somehow they would be able to tap into a different kind of energy. There's nothing on this map that signifies wind or thunder. The closest thing that signifies thunder is still the Empire of Waloed on the right side of the map. So that's the only mystery that we still really have. And if we could read any of this text, we might be able to pull some of that information from it. But for the time being, we're kind of just going to be stuck on that one. We're going to be looking for information about where those 2 remaining are, and to try and make some confirmation that those are indeed the 9 icons that are going to be present in this story. Of course, we still have questions to ask about what is the Blight, where did it come from, and who is the actual true antagonist of this game, whether it's the fiery figure that we see with Ifrit, or if it's somebody a little bit closer to the brothers than we maybe expect. But for the time being, I wanted to share this map, I wanted to share this theory with all of you because, let's be frank, we're not going to have much to talk about with Final Fantasy XVI for some time, and I just really wanted an excuse to make another YouTube video about it. With that honest answer, Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. And if anything else on that Twitter page pops up that conflicts with what we know, you can be sure I'll be making a video about it. On that note, though, thank you for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. And until then, take care.